We have a lot to talk about this morning, but we're here to raise the issue of Holocaust education at both the city and the state level. New York State is one of the few states in the United States that requires that schools teach about the Holocaust. Unfortunately, the results on the ground don't reflect the reality of the situation. A 2017 study showed that 41% of all Americans, nearly 2/3 of millennials, don't even know what the Auschwitz death camp is. 41% of millennials think that only 2 million Jews were killed rather than the accepted number of 6 million. 22% of millennials today have never even heard of the Holocaust. These numbers are staggering. And we see that as the Holocaust fades from memory, anti-Semitism and hate crimes are on the rise at historic levels. Year after year, we've seen things stay the same, and yet somehow we expect a different result. That doesn't really work. We have to connect the dots. With anti-Semitic incidents and neo-Nazi sentiment rhetoric rising in New York at drastic rates, an educational requirement is crucial. It's imperative that schools teach lessons of the Holocaust to ensure students remember the consequences of hate and inaction. And this must be an effort at all levels of government. Yes, there is a state mandate. However, city and state have to work together because we've fallen short so far. You know, there's a famous saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We can't face the future until we confront the past. We can't expect anti-Semitic hate crimes to go down until we teach our students what happened when hate is left unchecked. I know that I share this sentiment as the daughter of a Jewish educator, someone who worked at Yad Vashem for many years, and who grew up going to both private and public schools. You know, you go take the Regents and there's barely a mention of the Holocaust. You take history lessons in New York City public schools and there are barely mentions of the Holocaust and the atrocities that followed. So we're here as a unified front with some special guests. First, I'm going to introduce someone who's been a leader in the Jewish community and for the Jewish community, our City Controller, Scott Stringer. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman Neely Rosick, and thank you for the tremendous work that you do. I also want to recognize Assemblymember Rosenthal and ask him how his family's doing and make sure tired. You look tired. And I also want to recognize Dr. Rafi Kalman, the principal of the Solomon Schechter School, and Dr. Shay Pilnick, who's the director of Yeshiva University's Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And I really do want to thank the two assembly members for their work. And I want to recognize all the participating organizations and community leaders here with us today. You know, 3 weeks ago, the entire world witnessed a horrific display of white supremacy, racism, and anti-Semitism during the attack on our nation's capital. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a wider uptick in hate crimes around our country and across our city. We know that anti-Semitic incidents have been on the rise for the past several years. We've seen attacks on synagogues, Jewish New Yorkers, and swastikas drawn in public places all over the city. And yesterday, we honored the millions of lives we lost during the Holocaust, and we are recommitting ourselves to fight to ensure that it never happens again. And today we say loud and clear, New Yorkers will not stand for hateful acts of bigotry. No one should have to live in fear because of who they are, where they come from, or where they pray. And I believe that the most basic promise we should be able to make as government leaders is to keep our people out of harm's way. You know, at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in downtown Manhattan, where my wife Elise works, there's an exhibit on display of a train used in the Auschwitz extermination camp, a train that crammed in up to 80 people at a time to be deported to their deaths. That train was defaced with a Confederate flag just hours after the Capitol attack. Can you believe that? a Confederate flag put on that train display. We know what placing that flag on that train meant. It was a message of hate against the Jewish community. The rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes are a wake-up call, and we must recommit to educating our people. And Neely Rosick is 100% right. Schools are a critical gateway for teaching civic values. It is our duty to develop citizens who will stand up against discrimination. It does start in the classroom. And that's why the city must provide more outreach, more resources and training to make sure schools are equipped to effectively teach about the Holocaust, bias, and hate crimes. It's deeply disturbing that recent surveys have shown that up to 41% of Americans do not know what Auschwitz was, and that number is jumping to 2 out of 3 young people. A recent poll also found that almost a quarter of millennials believe the Holocaust is a myth. That is why we're calling for both the state and the city DOE to survey all New York City middle and high schools to make sure they're in compliance with teaching Holocaust education in grades 8, 10, 11 that are called for in Assemblymember Rosick's legislation. I also believe that we have an obligation to do this work because this is not about all of us. This is about remembering so we never repeat. And that is why we educate, because we have to tell the terrible truths so that we can all act accordingly. All different backgrounds have to come together when one group is targeted. That's the only way we're going to stop hate in this country and in this world, by all of us understanding each other's cultures, each other's tragedies, and nothing stands out more than the extermination of 6 million Jews at a time when so many people didn't believe it was happening then, and believe it or not, people don't believe it ever happened. And that's why I support this legislation. That's why I support the efforts of Assemblymember Rosenthal, and I'm really great to be here with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just like Neely Rosick, we have a leader in this district, or the neighboring district, and in the city, who has spoken out against hate crimes and different issues impacting the community. Like me, he's a young dad, and I know he hasn't gotten a lot of sleep, but that doesn't stop him from coming out and speaking on some of the most important issues facing our city and our country. Assemblymember Rosenthal. Dan Rosenthal.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Rosick and Comptroller Stringer. You know, it was only a little over a year ago where we had a stabbing at a synagogue on Hanukkah. It was less than a year ago that there was a shooting in a kosher grocery store right over the river in New Jersey. Just 6 weeks ago, as the Comptroller referenced, white supremacists marched on the United States Capitol wearing shirts that said 6 million weren't enough and Camp Auschwitz. Clearly, we are not doing enough. It was just yesterday, it was Holocaust Remembrance Day, celebrating the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I was reading a statement that one of my colleagues put out, and it said, the Jewish concentration camp of Auschwitz. And I texted that person, like, why'd you even bother saying Jewish? And she responded quickly saying, you wouldn't believe how many people don't even know what it is anymore. And it was really a damning thing to say that. There are survivors still alive. It was only 76 years ago. And people are already forgetting. More needs to be done to educate, to make sure hate does not become normalized, to make sure that when we see all sorts of anti-Semitism, whether it be a dog whistle or trope or just a blatant remark, that we stand up and united. And not just anti-Semitism. There has been a rise in hate crimes across the board. There's been a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes and xenophobic hate crimes. And we must make sure, we must do more to stop it now before it gets worse. So I appreciate you hosting this today.
Thank you. And the Assemblyman forgot to mention he's also a co-sponsor of the legislation that we're pushing at the state level, and has been a champion for these issues as well. Another champion for Holocaust studies and raising the awareness across the board of the atrocities that happened is Dr. Shai Pilnik, the director of Yeshiva University's Fish Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Dr. Pilnik.
I'm Dr. Shai Pilnik, and the director of the Emil and Jenny Fish Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center at Yeshiva University. I'm here to support Assemblywoman Rozik and Senator Kaplan and their colleagues to support a bill calling for compliance in Holocaust education, calling to ensure that the next generation that we are raising in this country would be aware of a cataclysmic, catastrophic event that took place over 70 years ago. When I was a child, I'm a grandson of 3 Holocaust survivors. I would understand the gravity of this event by facing Holocaust survivors in my daily life. Holocaust education as a field was built by Holocaust survivors. Emil Fish, who built the Fish Center for Holocaust Studies at Yeshiva University, is a Holocaust survivor who survived the camp of Bergen-Belsen as a child. All Holocaust survivors could do at that time is pull up their sleeve, show the tattoo on their arm, and tell us, never again. Show us what kind of atrocities, brutalities they endured on their flesh. In many ways, the world we live in still today is a post-Holocaust world. We're still impacted, we still live a Jewish life for sure. He's lived in the shadows of the Holocaust. But Holocaust survivors are dying. They're slowly dying and passing away. Even those who were child survivors are now too frail, all too often, to share their stories. Now it's on us. It's on children, grandchildren, it's on educators, and we have to make sure that Holocaust education would be taught in a quality way, because as Assemblywoman said before, if we veer away from education, we will be doomed to repeat what happened about 70, 80 years ago. Yeshiva University, and I'm here to represent the university, stand behind all of those on the ground, in the fields, in Albany, who support Holocaust education. The Fish Center is committed to training the next generation of teachers and civic leaders in the field and professional leaders. I also wanted to thank the Care Cafe initiative of the Wurzweiler School of Social Work and Dr. Orly Hauser for supporting Holocaust survivors across our city. So we are here to support survivors, but we are also here to support them by way of ensuring that when they are no longer with us, we, the next generation, will be teaching the generation following us to learn about what happened and to ensure that what happened would never be repeated or forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Polnick. And next up, we have, as a student here in Fresh Meadows, I went to the Solomon Schechter School of Queens, where we were faced with one-on-one with time with Holocaust survivors. Every year they would bring survivors to speak to students so that we could have one-on-one experiences and hear the stories and their tales of how resilient they are. And that happened at the Solomon Schechter School of Queens, not too far away from here, and I'm very proud to have been a student there and to have Dr. Kallman, the principal of Solomon Schechter, with us this morning. Dr. Kallman.
Thank you very much to the comptroller, assembly people that are here today. In an age where we have extremism on the left, on the right, where there's so much hate between all people, the lessons of the Holocaust are more important today than ever before. We've seen historically where hate can lead us, but we've also seen where speaking out for hate can prevent atrocities like this. There has been, as been mentioned here, increases in crimes against people of all races and religions in our country that's been going on for years. We saw it a few weeks ago, but the truth is that was a culmination. And it was a culmination because for too long, people have not spoken up. And I think a lot of that begins in the schools. A lot of that begins with education. A lot of that begins with letting children know where hate has led this world in the past and where hate can very easily lead us in the future. And so it's important that all schools talk out about hate, talk about the 6 million Jews, and that is an indisputable number. As a grandchild of whose grandparents went through the Holocaust and lost siblings and parents in that Holocaust. 6 million is a real number, and it needs to be repeated in the schools. And the memories of those who were lost have to be not in vain. Because if we can create a better world where we don't have hate anymore, then we can create a world where at least their memory is for a purpose. At least they passed, and that's tragic, but at least it could be for a better future. I am calling for all schools to include Holocaust studies in their programs to ensure that all students know about it, because without that, we are condemned to repeat it. We can't allow, as was mentioned earlier, the generation of Holocaust survivors is dying out. Their voice can't be the loud one anymore. It's on the rest of us to ensure, and that starts with the children. We need to ensure that children from a young age learn what happened, because that will stop it from happening again. So thank you, and we support this legislation.
I want to thank everyone for coming, and just in conclusion, to thank Assemblymember Rosick, Assemblymember Rosenthal, and all the leaders who are here today. You know, this is, again, not about us. This is about our children. And as my kids start to grow up, 9 and 7, the challenge for parents is to teach about civil rights and social justice and the Holocaust. And we need help. We need the school system. We need teachers who are trained to help us in making sure that our kids are fully knowledgeable about what this is about. Because after all, when they came for the Capitol and everyone said, why is this happening in our country? Well, it was right in front of us. And we have to teach, and we have to make sure that future generations understand what's at stake for our democracy and for our people. So I just want to, again, say thank you. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the Department of Education understands what we're trying to accomplish and work to make this city much better. And I guess if there's any questions from the press.